This is a talk prepared for the Massachusetts Lifecare Residents Association, and I want to thank Will Holton for recommending me and Lauren Hale for arranging it, and particularly I want to thank Orchard Cove for hosting us. The topic is the evolving CCRC, How Safe is Your Future? In it, we deal with the hidden side of CCRC's finances, contracts, governance. The more obvious parts are meal service, the layout of the apartments, and above all, the character of the residents. Here's the good news. You, by moving to a continuing care retirement community, also known as a CCRC or as a life plan community, have responsibly taken action to provide for your own contingencies of aging. You have discovered the joys of communal living and have made many new friends and discovered new interests, perhaps even new passions. Moreover, the food is tasty and free of the burdens of preparation and cleanup, and the apartments are fine once we've completed the stressful task of downsizing. Life is good, carefree, safe, and liberating. But what of finances, contracts, and governance? These elements of CCRC living are less evident, and there is little that residents can do to affect them. This talk is about what is obscure, even as it affects you. I was asked to talk about how CCRCs differ from one another, what are the pros and cons of nonprofit organization, and what are the financial issues involved with CCRCs. The first question, how CCRCs differ from one another, can be quickly answered. And the answer is that they differ greatly among each other. There is no comparability from one CCRC to another, despite what the appearances might be. There's a saying which is popular among CCRC executives. If you've seen one CCRC, you've only seen one CCRC. What's the takeaway from that? It means that there is no uniformity among CCRCs, and that means that prospects need to educate themselves about what they are contracting for and where they are going to live. A recent posting in agingcare.com raises the question whether anyone has an experience with a bankrupt CCRC. This, of course, is a question that it's wise for any prospective resident to consider before paying an entrance fee, much less selling a house to raise the funding for an entrance fee. Our correspondent writes, "My husband and I are considering buying into a CCRC. We can afford it, but I am concerned about the financial stability of the community that we might otherwise prefer. They, the provider, is a nonprofit, but they are losing money every year and operating on city revenue bonds. I guess it's a great deal for residents now who are obviously paying less than the cost of the services they get. But we could live another 20 to 30 years. And if we buy in now, is there much assurance that the provider can fulfill our contract?" When I asked the manager, he said that the management company would find some place to borrow more money if they need to. I know this industry has had financial problems in some communities. Does anyone know about the resolution of such problems in any specific community or have any advice for me? If we make the buy-in and pay the monthly fee for several years, I fear that we won't have the financial or emotional resources to relocate if the CCRC folds. That's a very good question. How would you answer? how strong is your CCRC? Charles Dickens had Mr. Micawber, in his novel David Copperfield, give advice about the key to financial happiness. He said, annual income £20, annual expenditure £19, 19 shillings and sixpence, result happiness. Annual income £20, annual expenditure £20, ought and six, result misery. In short, revenue should always exceed expenses. Does your CCRC live within its means? Here's the results from the nonprofit CCRCs in Massachusetts. You see that most of the nonprofit CCRCs in Massachusetts are operating in the red. The letters at the bottom are labels assigned to the different CCRCs. I didn't want to single out individual CCRCs here because that might be a distraction as people look for their own CCRCs. But it appears that if you are living in a Massachusetts nonprofit CCRC, there's a very good chance that your CCRC is spending more than its income. Let's look at the overall situation for the nonprofit industry in Massachusetts. The for-profits don't reveal their financials. The total value of contractual commitments made, which is the liabilities, the liability is the accounting term for the valuation of all of the commitments that an enterprise or a person has made. And the total for the nonprofit CCRCs in Massachusetts is nearly $2.5 billion. But they're operating at a loss, and the cumulative value so far of that negative operation is nearly $500 million. To be precise, it's $424,246.32 for fiscal years ending in 2015, which is the most recently available data. That means there's a percentage deficit of negative 17.6%. And we show that here in the chart where you see the value of the commitments made, the resources available to meet those commitments, and the shortfall in resources, assets that are available to meet the commitments, liabilities. We do need some qualifications, though, before we draw too many conclusions from those numbers. First, GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, which is today's accounting standard, is not the best measure of CCRC financial strength. There may be unrecognized market appreciation in the CCRC property, and contingent liabilities for future resident services are often determined by a life expectancy rule and thus may be understated. It's quite possible that both the assets and the liabilities are understated. Recently, the AICPA, the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, has released a draft guideline that views CCRC contracts as monthly renewable instead of lifetime commitments. That means that they take the view that instead of the lifetime contract that most residents would imagine a CCRC undertaking to be, at least an entrance fee CCRC undertaking to be, the accountants view it as a monthly contract in which the residents have an option to renew it for another month. Given the entrance fee nature, that seems highly questionable, and one has to wonder how the accountants can justify such an assertion. Moreover, GAAP is on a going concern basis. And that's not really a good measure of the value of a CCRC, especially when, like Air Force Village West in Riverside, California, or the University Village at Tampa, or the community that's recently failed in Stillwater, Oklahoma, for what the situation, the true financial situation of the organization is. For these reasons, insurance regulators require statutory accounting, which is more protective of consumers than GAAP. Why the difference? Insurance companies are required to establish reserves to ensure that the contractual promises that they make are backed by adequate financial resources. CCRC accounting provides no matching of contract consideration to the contract promises funded thereby. The accountants have stated that the entrance fee matches simply because they said that the life expectancy rule that they use is sufficient to meet their matching requirement. But they make no difference whether it's a Lifecare contract or a fee-for-service contract. So clearly, there is no matching. So is your CCRC as sound as the Rock of Gibraltar? Well, let's consider that insurance analogy for a minute. Entrance fees are like an insured life annuity in providing reduced monthly fees for life. Let's take a moment to think about that. You pay an entrance fee in the expectation that the ongoing fee that you're going to be paying monthly thereafter will be reduced commensurate with the amount of the entrance fee that you pay. That could be accomplished if the entrance fee were simply used to buy an annuity that would pay an income to the CCRC, which would offset the monthly fee that would otherwise be needed. Thus, it's quite evident that as a contract element, entrance fees are like an insured life annuity, and they provide reduced monthly fees for life. Many providers use entrance fees, though, as free cash to be used for provider purposes at the provider's discretion. In fact, I think if you look into your contract, you may find that your provider has granted himself or herself or itself that authority contractually and has asked you to accept it as part of your contractual undertaking. In other words, there's no assurance that you're going to get any value from your entrance fee payment. That's somewhat stunning. Moreover, life annuities are subject to regulation by the Department of Insurance, and there's a guarantee that whether the insurance company fails or not, the promised benefits will be paid. There is no comparable regulatory assurance for entrance fee investments. Moreover, the Massachusetts Department of Insurance is accredited by the National Association of Insurance Commissioners to meet national standards. So not only does the Department of Insurance have higher standards for insurance contracts than those that are applied to CCRC contracts, but the department itself has agreed to meet a national standard for effective regulation. The Executive Office of Elder Affairs, which is the regulatory body for CCRCs in Massachusetts, has no such accreditation and takes no such regulatory role with respect to CCRCs. That then raises the question whether an entrance fee is a blue sky investment or a sound down payment on lifetime care. Many providers treat entrance fees as though they were a speculative equity investment to secure debt financing. Consider a nonprofit. It can only raise money from donors or borrowing. If it doesn't have enough donors to secure debt financing, like the down payment would be for a mortgage on a house, then it has to use the entrance fees as though they were the at-risk equity payment to protect the bondholders from loss. To me, that means they're treating the entrance fees as though it was an investment. Yet entrance fee contracts are not regulated as securities under the Massachusetts Blue Sky laws or the federal securities laws. That raises the question, are entrance fees a speculative investment or contract consideration paid to secure a resident's future? Does the entrance fee assure lifetime residence and care, i.e., is it a lifetime contract, or only short-term resident until the resident is deemed by the provider to need care that the provider believes it is not equipped or prepared to provide, a month-to-month contract, as the AICPA asserts? You can Google, are CCRCs financially sound? And the results are interesting. The first result on this list is a CCRC which has paid Google to advertise. It happens to be here, a for-profit community. Then it goes to mylifesite.net, which is a recently developed website that offers on a fee basis information about CCRCs. The next item here, actually the next two items, refer to a New York Times article which appeared recently and included 7 ways to judge a retirement community's financial health. Actually, these two items are the same because the New York Times syndicated the article, so the local paper article is identical with the New York Times article. And the New York Times article source for the 7 questions was principally the mylifesite.net website. So this is all somewhat circular here. Here you see the New York Times article as it appeared in the New York Times. And that's a picture of my wife and me up there on the beach right outside our CCRC. And since I've introduced my wife, I thought I'd share our story so you can get a sense of how I came to be doing what I'm doing. That's a picture of my wife up there in the upper right, because you've got me in person, so you don't need a picture of me. In 1998, Valerie's parents moved to Rivermead in Peterborough, New Hampshire. They were in their late 80s, and when we visited them, we really liked what we saw. Meals, nice home activities, care if you needed it, seemed ideal. Thus, in 2004, 6 years later, when our friends the Swansons started looking for a CCRC, we joined them in their search. They moved to Air Force Village West, but we were not eligible. At that time, you had to be a retired Air Force officer to be able to live at Air Force Village West. So we got on the waiting list for Carlsbad by the Sea, and it took 2 years, but we moved in 2006. We love the concept. We love the location, but we were naive. We simply assumed that everything behind the scenes was what it appeared to be, carefree and liberating. We, and here I'll say I, because I'm an insurance actuary, assumed that CCRCs are regulated, as are the insurance companies with which I was familiar. After all, the elderly are more vulnerable than most policyholders. Incidentally, you see there a picture of our CCRC. You can see why it was appealing. This brings us to a reality check. And for this, I've turned to Rebecca Benson, who's counsel with a Boston law firm, Margulies and Bloom. She's one of the very few attorneys who specialize in CCRCs. And she gives us a reality check. There are no federal laws or regulations concerning CCRCs. Massachusetts CCRCs are subject to certain disclosure requirements, but no state agency has enforcement authority over CCRCs. Some Massachusetts CCRCs charge entrance fees of well over $500,000, and the industry is virtually unregulated. Nevertheless, Prospective CCRC residents do not always consult with an attorney before signing their admission agreements. When they do, they may be surprised to find out what the agreements require. Here's an actual sentence from a contract that a resident, who happens to be my sister, was required to sign by a provider. I understand and agree that at any time, and from time to time, all without notice to me, and without affecting your rights or my obligations hereunder, you may alter any terms of the residence agreement or any part of it, including renewing, compromising, extending, or accelerating, or otherwise changing the time for payment of amounts due thereunder. My sister wanted to move in, so she accepted this contract, and her rationale was, well, the providers are good people. They never take advantage of something like this, and we want to live here, so we're moving in. How strong is your own CCRC? Here we look at the balance sheet situation. A balance sheet net worth is defined as the excess of assets over liabilities. And you'll recall, liabilities are the value of the commitments made. Assets are the resources available to meet those liabilities. And since there are always contingencies, it's a good idea to have assets that have an excess over the liabilities. That excess is called net worth. And here you see the net worth of Massachusetts nonprofit CCRCs. There's roughly 30 CCRCs in Massachusetts, so over 80% are operating without sufficient resources to meet their commitments. If we look at the strength of the industry overall, here on the left, we see that the CCRC industry has a deficit, while the more heavily regulated industry, the Massachusetts life and annuity industry, and bear in mind that if an entrance fee is the same as an annuity, then you'd expect it to be regulated similarly to the way annuities are regulated. The life insurance industry operates at a surplus. It has more than enough resources to meet its commitments, while the CCRC industry lags and has a deficit in the resources available to meet its commitments. What's to be done about the plight of CCRC residents today? And that's a tough question, because generally people view CCRC residents as affluent. They ought to be able to care for themselves. They should have known what they were getting into. So if they made a bad deal, too bad. That's simply the way it is. But there are things that might be done. First, we might move oversight to the insurance department, which has the resources needed to regulate. Those resources include actuaries to do the analysis. They have examiners who can go out and determine whether insurers, or in the case of CCRCs are soundly operated and are meeting all the requirements. There's a lot of resources that the insurance department has that the Office of Elder Affairs does not. Of course, the insurance department would probably want additional funding to allow for additional staff positions, but the CCRC industry is so small compared with the insurance industry that the additions would probably be relatively minimal. They could encourage the National Association of Insurance Commissioners to develop model laws and regulations, CCRCs, for CCRCs comparable to those for insurance. The NAIC, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, is comprised of all the regulators in the 50 states and 5 territories. And they are able, by pooling state resources, to come together to get to pay for resources that no state could individually afford. And that has given us a very sound system of national regulation for the insurance industry, which is handled at the state level. And that's a model that would make sense for CCRCs, which also are regulated at the state level, although there's been no effort to develop national standards for them. Here you see the homepage of the NAIC, and I've circled here in yellow so that you can see that it's meeting this year, from August 4th to 7th in Boston. And the meetings are open to people who want to attend. So if you're interested in improving CCRC regulation, it would be wise to attend the meeting. Right now, the NAIC does very little in the CCRC area, even though many states have the insurance departments in charge of CCRC regulation. The NAIC does have a senior issues task force, and that would be the body which would take up CCRC regulation. But to date, the industry has been able to oppose this kind of regulation. This is something that could change, and there's a unique opportunity this August when the NAIC will be meeting in Boston. It will bring together the regulators from all over the country, and the Massachusetts Insurance Commissioner, who's a member of the NAIC, could gain stature by taking a lead in leading the NAIC to take up the plight of CCRC residents. Moreover, for life insurance companies, there's a guarantee law, which is comparable to what you're familiar with, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation for banks deposits, or the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation for pensions, or the Securities Industry Protective Corporation for brokerage accounts. Massachusetts could lead the nation in adopting a CCRC guarantee law. That would be a relatively simple step for the state to take, since the precedent is already there for life insurance companies. Today, every state in the union has such a guarantee law, and it would be a simple matter to extend that same kind of protection to the CCRC industry. In fact, NACRA, the National Association of Continuing Care Residents, has a model law to show the way to do exactly that. Here you see the homepage of the Massachusetts Life and Health Insurance Guarantee Association. It helps Massachusetts policyholders when they need it the most. CCRC residents have no such protection. They're treated as a lower level than our life insurance policyholders. And yet, to my mind, the elderly people living in CCRCs are far more vulnerable and deserve to have this same kind of protection. And it would be a simple matter for the Massachusetts legislature to put this on the books and to bring this to life as the first state in the union to protect the interests of CCRC residents. What is guarantee legislation? Insurance policyholders are shielded from loss in the event the insurance company fails. CCRC residents who invest in entrance fee contracts are no more than general creditors. That means their entrance fee goes entirely to offset the loss before the debt providers are asked to take a loss on their debt. The entrance fees shield the passive debt investors from loss. If you look at the Massachusetts guarantee for policyholders, you'll find how this works. In the event that a member insurer, now read CCRC, but that's what we're hoping for, but I'll read it substituting for insurer the word CCRC, so you get the idea. In the event that a member CCRC is found to be insolvent and is ordered to be liquidated by a court, the Guarantee Association law enables the Guarantee Association to provide protection up to the limits spelled out in the law to Massachusetts residents who are residents of CCRCs and who have continuing care contracts with the insolvent CCRC. Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing to have in place? Now we get to this question about nonprofits and for-profits. It comes down to the central question about taxes. Do you pay them or do you not pay them? That is the question. Here's the distribution of ownership types in Massachusetts. 20 CCRCs are exempt from federal taxes. 8 are tax-paying, and they bring considerable revenue to the local communities where they reside. They pay their fair share of taxes, and that helps to support municipal services. 2 are cooperative, which means that the residents are the owners, so therefore those 2 are tax-paying, although they often have a nonprofit affiliate for central sources, so the cooperative model is kind of a hybrid. Let's look at some of the differences. The non-for-profits are required by the IRS's revenue ruling 72-124 to keep residents in residence if their funds run out. 72-124 is the IRS ruling that allows profitable CCRCs to be tax exempt, since it rules that just caring for the elderly is in and of itself a charitable activity. Many providers solicit residents to contribute funds, and that has the effect of reducing the provider's obligation. Nonprofits are also required by the same revenue ruling to operate at the lowest feasible cost. But that's been interpreted as a community standard and has not been enforced. So many nonprofit CCRCs are highly luxurious. So they're clearly not operating at the lowest feasible cost. Not-for-profits are perceived as more altruistic. And some staff and executives may be attracted to nonprofits because they like that charitable intent. They want to be giving of themselves. They like the idea that mission is put ahead of financial soundness. Of course, many family-owned for-profit CCRCs are also founded with a community service intent. Nonprofits are perceived as more caring. Well, maybe naturally nurturing people are more willing to work for a nonprofit than for a for-profit. But many employees in for-profits are very dedicated to the residents. Nonprofits are perceived as giving better value. Well, to compete, both must be market competitive. There's no evidence that nonprofits give better value than do for-profits. The common saying is that the inefficiencies that are tolerated within a nonprofit are more than enough to offset the taxes that the for-profits pay. And nonprofits are perceived as resident-oriented. That's simply not the case. With rare exceptions, governance practices, including board representation, favor managerial decisions over residents. A popular perception is that nonprofits are mission-oriented. For-profits are investor-funded, while nonprofits are donor-funded. But many CCRCs regard entrance fees as tantamount to donations. I don't think that's what people think when they pay an entrance fee. They think they're making a down payment on a contract. Lenders view CCRC entries as equity capital to be expended before lenders are impacted. already touched on that. And for-profit operators pay their full share of taxes. Nonprofit businesses are tax favored only because they're deemed to serve a public purpose, care for the elderly. If tax status isn't the big difference, what is? Developers tend to seek a quick and large return on their effort in capital raising. And that's true whether they're not-for-profit or for-profit. The not-for-profits are often advised by Greystone, Ziegler, Cain Brothers, all of which are highly profitable and who advise development activities for nonprofits. On the other hand, operators, whether they're for-profit or not-for-profit, are in it for the long term, and so are concerned with reputation, resident experience, and customer value. What I would dream of is that there would be a harmony, a cycle in which everybody helps each other. The residents provide the income that provides a return to the providers of capital. The providers of capital are very similar to the residents. They're simply people who typically buy tax-exempt mutual funds or the like. Those tax-exempt mutual funds are a big source of capital that can be used for CCRC development. The capital intermediaries, I've already mentioned two, Ziegler and Cain Brothers, are firms which specialize in providing financing to senior living communities and operate in the tax-exempt bond market and earn a commission or an income, a fee income for providing those services, and that's a very lucrative business. The capital users are the people who are developing the CCRCs, and the provider executives then take over to operate the CCRC for the benefit of the residents. So in the ideal fantasy, we'd have a continuous cycle where everybody would work in harmony together. In a nutshell, the integrity, vision, and mindset of the provider management team are the key to a successful CCRC living experience. The providers are in the driver's seat, and the providers make the difference. The two co-op models give a more prominent role to residents, and that's a very positive thing. But in general, the providers make all the decisions, and the residents are merely advisors. I should say a word about NACRA, since I'm here representing NACRA. There's a false perception that all CCRC regulation must be by individual states with no coordination among the states. Well, we've talked about the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. If the NAIC adopts a model law, it becomes the law in every state. So it's not true that you have to go state by state to get adequate regulation. There are national bodies other than the federal government that are able to develop uniform standards across all states. There's a false perception that national means federal legislation. There's a lack, and this is the problem with all resident organizations, there's a lack of qualified, willing leaders with the talent needed to lead NACRA. There's a lack of financial resources adequate to support a robust advocacy agenda. And because of the way things have developed, NACRA membership is separate from state association membership. And that makes it very hard for NACRA as a derivative organization to be able to accomplish what it might otherwise be able. And that brings me to the part where we need to get your impact and get your thinking. What do you think? Is NACRA needed? Is change desirable for the CCRC industry? If so, what? What can be done to improve aging in America? If CCRCs are not the trustworthy option, what could take its place? Do we need government programs like Medicare to have a long-term care element, or should we look for more private initiative? How can NACRA best work with the Massachusetts Lifecare Residents Association and other state associations? That's been a recurring question through the years. How can we attract the incisive experience and effective resident leadership needed? And lastly, what will aging in America be like 20 years from now, in 2038? Our children then will be the age we are now. What kind of aging experience will they have? Will they be less well off than we are, or will they be better off? Thank you. And the slides are available on actionaging.com for all who want.